The air in San Gabriel was thick with dust and the stench of cheap whiskey, but it was the silence that choked Lissy Creed. On the splintered auction block, beside a rust-eaten plough and 3 lame horses, stood a human being. They called her Anna, a hostile, captured by the agency. She was bound, bruised, and draped in a canvas sack, her black hair matted with grime. But when she lifted her head, her eyes were not broken. They were burning coals of fury. And in that moment, Lissy, a man shackled by his own ghosts, made a bid that would either save them both or doom them entirely. Lissy Creed hadn't come to San Gabriel for a fight. He'd come for barbed wire, salt bricks, and a small sack of coffee beans, the meager necessities his struggling ranch, the Crosswind, demanded. The town was a raw scar in the Arizona Territory, a collection of adobe huts and false-fronted saloons cowering under a relentless sun. He'd tied his mule, Bess, outside the general store, the jingle of his last few dollars a hollow sound in his pocket. That's when he saw the crowd. It was gathered in the main square, a loose, jeering circle around a makeshift platform. This wasn't a cattle auction. This was something darker. Presiding over the affair was a man in a sweat-stained suit, his voice a greasy rasp that cut through the midday heat. He was selling off seized assets and indentured contracts, a legal fiction that smelled suspiciously like the slave markets Lissy had fought a war to destroy. And watching from the shaded balcony of the Indian Agency office, cigar smoke curling around his head like a halo of flies, was Agent Bartholomew Hodge. Lissy despised Hodge. The man ran the nearby San Carlos agency with the predatory grip of a wolf in a henhouse. He was a man who got rich while the Apache starved, a purveyor of government rot. "Next lot," the auctioneer barked. "A special contract, direct from Agent Hodge himself. A recent acquisition, captured near Fort Grant. Hostile but trainable, guaranteed for 5 years of labor. We call her Anna." 2 brutish men dragged a woman onto the platform. She stumbled, her hands tied tight, a rough canvas shift her only clothing. She was small, but she moved with a coiled tension. Her face was smud sails, but her eyes swept the crowd with a contempt so pure it made Lissy flinch. "Look at that defiance," the auctioneer chuckled, as if selling a prized mare. "Needs a firm hand, this one. Who'll start the bidding? $10 for the contract. 10. A thick-necked man in the front row, Frank Garrett, spat a stream of tobacco juice. Garrett ran the biggest spread in the valley, the G-Bar, and was known for his cruelty. 20, Garrett grunted, his eyes fixed on the woman with a look of vile ownership. 20 from Mr. Garrett, a man who knows value. Lissy felt a cold sickness rise in his gut. It was the same sickness he'd felt at Andersonville, watching men rot from the inside out, powerless to stop it. He saw the way Garrett looked at her. He saw the smirks in the crowd. He saw Agent Hodge light a fresh cigar, perfectly at ease. 30, Garrett yelled, impatient. 35, Lissy said. The word was out before he could stop it. The crowd turned. Garrett's head swiveled, his small eyes narrowing. He didn't know Lissy well, just as the quiet, haunted rancher from the Crosswind. Well, well, the auctioneer grinned. A dark horse. 35 from Mr. Creed. Do I hear 40? 50, Garrett snapped, his gaze locked on Lissy. It was a challenge. Lissy's hand went to the small pouch inside his coat. It held $112. It was everything. It was seed for next season, payment on the banknote, food for the winter. It was his entire life. Narlin, the woman they called Anna, looked at him. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were assessing. They were sharp, intelligent, and held a challenge of their own. 60, Lissy said, his voice quiet but clear. 80! Garrett roared, his face turning purple. $80, the auctioneer crowed. A fine price for a fine piece of labor. Going once? Lissy looked at the woman. He saw the thin, raised scar on her cheek, the fresh bruises on her arms. He saw the ghosts of his past, the men he couldn't save, the promises he'd broken. He couldn't fix the world. He couldn't even fix his own broken ranch. But he could do this. This one damnable bankrupting thing. 100, Lissy said. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Garrett's jaw dropped. He stared at Lissy, calculating. $100 was half a year's wages for a top hand. It was an insane price for a single indenture. Garrett scoffed, turning away. He's mad. Let the fool have her. $100. Sold. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. To Mr. Lissy Creed for $100. Step up and sign the paper, Mr. Creed. Agent Hodge watched from his balcony, an unreadable, almost amused expression on his face. Lissy felt a cold dread, deeper than just the loss of his money. He had just painted a target on his own back. He walked to the platform, his boots heavy in the dust. He ignored the whispers. He ignored the auctioneer's fawning congratulations. He was led to a small desk where a clerk, operating under the authority of Sheriff Brody Kent, had the contract ready. Lissy signed his name, the ink bleeding on the cheap paper. He handed over his pouch. The clerk counted the coins, greedily, twice. She's all yours, Mr. Creed. The shackles are agency property, though. We'll need 'em back. One of the guards unlocked the woman's wrist bonds. She rubbed her raw skin, her eyes never leaving Lissy. She was his. The thought made him want to vomit. He didn't say a word. He just jerked his head toward his mule. Come on. She followed him. The silence of the wagon ride back to the Crosswind Ranch was a new kind of hell. It was louder than gunfire, heavier than cannon smoke. She sat in the back of the small buckboard, her back ramrod straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if memorizing the path, or perhaps simply refusing to look at the man who had just bought her. Lissy stared at the dusty rump of his mule, the reins slick in his sweaty palms. He hadn't saved her. He had just changed her master. He had bought a woman at auction, becoming the very thing he'd once fought against. And as the sun bled into the western hills, painting the sky in shades of blood and violet, Lissy Creed had never felt less free. The Crosswind Ranch wasn't much. It was a small, 3-room adobe house, a leaning barn, and a web of split-rail fences, all nestled in a high desert valley that was beautiful and merciless in equal measure. Lissy had built it with his own hands, hoping the isolation would quiet the screaming in his head. It hadn't. He pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch. The silence was absolute, broken only by the wind whistling through the canyon, the crosswind that gave the place its name. Narlin, he refused to use the name, Anna, didn't move. She just watched him. Lissy's awkwardness was a physical thing. It made his limbs feel heavy. He was a man of action, of fences and cattle, not of this. There's a room, he said, gesturing lamely at the house. It's yours. She slid off the wagon, landing with a soft, cat-like sound. She followed him inside. The main room was sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a cold fireplace, and a shelf with a few battered books. His own room was just a cot and a trunk. He pointed to the 3rd door. In there. It had been his wife's room, long ago, before the fever took her. It was barely more than a cell, with a small window and a simple cot. But it had a sturdy door, and on that door, a heavy bolt lock he'd installed after a coyote scare. Narlin saw the lock. Her entire body tensed. Her eyes, which had been watchful, now flashed with pure, undiluted hatred. She thought he was bringing her to a cage, and God help him, he was. "Aye," he started, but the words died. What could he say? "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not Frank Garrett?" The auction block had made him the same as Garrett. He was overwhelmed by a sudden, paralyzing fear. Not of her, but of himself. Of the power he now held. He stepped back, his hand shaking. "Just stay in there. I'll bring food." He closed the door. And then, the ultimate act of cowardice. The sound that would haunt his sleep for weeks. The scrape and thud of the heavy iron bolt sliding into place. He locked her in. He leaned against the main room wall, breathing hard, the $100 he'd spent feeling like a millstone. He'd saved her from Garrett only to imprison her himself. He spent the first night on the porch, his rifle across his knees, listening. He heard nothing. No crying, no raging, no sound at all. The silence from her room was more terrifying than a scream. The next morning, he fried bacon and made coffee. He put a plate and a cup on a tray, his hands fumbling. He carried it to her door. He slid the bolt back, his heart pounding. He opened the door a crack and pushed the tray inside. She was in the far corner, standing, watching him like a trapped hawk. She hadn't slept. "Food," he mumbled, and shut the door, bolting it again. This became their ritual. For 3 days, he brought food. He'd open the door. She'd be standing there, watchful. He'd retrieve the tray hours later, the food untouched. She was starving herself. On the 3rd night, Lissy couldn't take it anymore. He was drinking, the whiskey doing nothing to dull the self-loathing. He was a jailer. He was Andersonville all over again, the man with the keys, watching someone waste away. He slammed the bottle down. "No," he growled to the empty room. "No more." He went to her door. He slid the bolt. The sound was deafening. He threw the door wide open. Nalin tensed, her hands curling into claws, ready for the attack she'd been expecting. Lissy backed away, his hands raised, palms out. He retreated to the porch, slumping into his rocking chair. He placed his rifle on the floor, well out of his own reach. He turned his chair so his back was mostly to the door. He sat there, staring into the blackness of the high desert. "The door is open," he said, his voice raw. "You can come out. You can take the mule. You can run. I don't care. But I won't. I won't be your jailer. I won't." He sat for an hour. The wind howled. A coyote yipped in the distance. He heard a floorboard creak. He didn't turn. He just waited. His muscles coiled. He heard her step onto the porch. He could feel her presence behind him. She stood there for a long minute, just breathing. He could feel her gaze on the back of his neck, heavy and sharp. He imagined the 100 ways she could kill him right now. He deserved it. Then he heard her move past him. Not to the mule, not to the rifle. She sat in the other rocking chair, 10 feet away, a silent shadow in the moonlight. She didn't run. He didn't know what to do. So he just sat. They sat there for hours, 2 broken people on a dark porch, listening to the wind, surrounded by a prison neither of them knew how to unlock. The silence was still there, but for the first time, it wasn't an accusation. It was just a space, waiting to be filled. The sun rose, painting the canyon walls in hues of gold and rose. Lissy's back ached. He turned his head. She was still there, in the other chair, her expression unreadable. She looked exhausted, but the fire in her eyes had been banked, replaced by a wary, calculating intelligence. "My name," she said, her voice a dry rasp, "is Nalin." Lissy nodded slowly. The name Anna had been a brand, a label of property. "Nalin," he repeated. It felt right. "I'm Lissy." She gave a short, sharp nod. as if to say the pleasantries were over. He stood, stretching his stiff limbs. I have chores, fences to mend, the south pasture. He looked at her, at a loss. He couldn't command her. He couldn't ask her. The $100 he'd spent had brought him nothing but a profound moral complication. I will not be taken back to town, she stated. It wasn't a plea. It was a fact. I won't take you, he said. You're free to go, but it's hard country. Hodge's men are out there. Garrett's men, too. She looked out at the harsh, unforgiving landscape. She knew. She understood the terrain better than he did. She also understood the human predators. I need food, she said. I will work for the food. It was a contract, but one she was making, not one forced upon her. All right, Lissy nodded. We'll work. The following days were a study in silent cooperation. The air between them was brittle, like thin ice. Lissy gave her a pair of his old work gloves and a spare hat. They rode out to the south pasture, Lissy on his main horse, a buckskin named Patches, and Nayland riding the mule, Bess. She rode with a natural, effortless grace that made the mule look almost noble. They worked on the fence line. He showed her how to stretch the wire, how to hammer the staples. She learned instantly. Her movements were precise, economical. She didn't waste a single motion. She worked as hard as any man he'd ever hired, and she did it with a grim, focused intensity. He observed her. She was constantly scanning the horizon. Every snap of a twig, every distant cry of a hawk, made her hand drop to the hatchet he'd given her for clearing brush. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. A week into this uneasy truce, they were working near the creek when Lissy's most difficult horse, a spirited roan gelding named Red, snapped his tether and bolted. Red was half wild, and Lissy had been trying to break him for a month with no success. "Damn it!" Lissy cursed, starting to run after him. "Stay," Nayland said, holding up a hand. Lissy stopped. Nayland walked calmly into the small clearing where Red was snorting, his eyes white with panic. She didn't approach him directly. She walked in a slow, wide, spiraling circle, her head down, never making eye contact. She was humming, a low, repetitive, guttural sound. It was hypnotic. Red stopped pacing. He pricked his ears, his head high, watching her. Nayland slowly, closed the circle. She was still humming. She reached the horse. She didn't grab for the rope. She just stood near his shoulder, still humming, and placed a hand on his neck. The horse shuddered, but didn't pull away. She stroked him, once, twice. Then she gently took the broken rope, and the horse followed her back to the tree as if he were a newborn colt. Lissy was speechless. He'd spent 20 years around horses. He'd never seen anything like it. She tied the rope. "He is not mean," she said, her first unsolicited words. "He is afraid. You pull, he pulls back." Lissy looked at the horse, then at Nayland. He realized with a jolt that she wasn't just talking about the horse. The fragile piece was shattered 2 days later. 3 riders appeared on the horizon. Lissy's hand went to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Nayland melted back into the shadow of a rock formation, the hatchet in her hand. Lissy recognized the men. It was Frank Garrett and 2 of his thuggish ranch hands. They trotted up, their smiles wide and predatory. Garrett's eyes scanned the work site, landing on Nayland. Well, Creed," Garrett said, resting his forearms on his saddle horn. "Just checking on my neighbor. See how he's enjoying his expensive new purchase." Lissy stood his ground, his hand resting on Patches's neck, inches from his rifle. "She's not a purchase, Garrett. And you're not my neighbor. This is my land. Ride on." Garrett chuckled. "Feisty. I like that." But you see, I think you made a bad investment. $100. Phew, I'd be willing to take her off your hands. Say $50, I'd be doing you a favor. She looks used up already. Nalin stepped out from the rocks. She didn't look at Garrett. She looked at Lissy. Her eyes were hard. Do not fail me. I said, ride on, Lissy said, his voice dropping to a low growl. He pulled the Winchester from its scabbard. The shing of the metal was a clear, sharp sound in the quiet air. I won't say it again. Garrett's smile vanished. He looked at Lissy's eyes, cold and steady. He looked at the rifle. He looked at Nalin, who was watching him with an expression of such profound, murderous contempt that he actually flinched. You're making a mistake, Creed, Garrett sneered. A big one. Agent Hodge don't like when his property gets misplaced. He tends to worry, and when Hodge worries, people get hurt. He spun his horse, spraying gravel. You'll be seeing me. The three riders galloped away, their laughter ugly on the wind. Lissy let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He chambered the round. He looked at Nalin. She was staring at the retreating riders. Hodge, she said, the name a curse. He is the one. He's the one, Lissy agreed, his heart sinking. He had them. He had just declared war on the most powerful, corrupt man in the territory. The confrontation with Garrett changed everything. The fragile silence between Lissy and Nalin was replaced by a taut, shared dread. Garrett's threat wasn't idle. It was a promise. Agent Bartholomew Hodge was not a man to be crossed, and Lissy had just publicly defied him and his biggest local ally. Lissy spent the night pacing the porch, the rifle his new companion. He was a rancher, not a gunman. He'd seen enough fighting to last 10 lifetimes. But he recognized the feeling, the tightening knot in the stomach, the metallic taste of fear, the certainty of violence to come. He was in over his head. Nalin was inside, sharpening the kitchen knives. The sound, schlit, 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 was a rhythmic, unnerving counterpoint to his own anxiety. He will send men, she said, not looking up from the whetstone as he walked in for coffee. Not Garrett, Hodge, men with papers or badges. She was right. Sheriff Brody Kent was Hodge's puppet. They could come with a warrant, claim the indenture was invalid, and seize her. Or they could just come in the night and burn him out. I need to know what we're up against, Lissy said, more to himself than to her. I need to see someone. There was only one person in San Gabriel who wasn't on Hodge's payroll or cowed by him. Father Matthew. At dawn, Lissy saddled Patches. Stay here, he told Nalin. Bar the door. Use the rifle if anyone but me rides up. Don't hesitate. She just nodded, her eyes dark. Be fast. They are watching this place. He rode hard, avoiding the main road, cutting through the rocky arroyos that he knew better than anyone. He entered San Gabriel from the back, tying his horse behind the small adobe mission church. He found Father Matthew in the courtyard, tending a small, defiant patch of chili peppers. The priest was a thin, wiry man with a kind face etched by sun and sorrow. He'd come west to save souls and had found himself mostly just burying bodies. Lissy, the priest said, wiping his hands on his cassock, his eyes full of concern. It is not Sunday, and you look like a man who has seen a ghost. Worse, Lissy said. I saw Bartholomew Hodge's face. In the cool, dim quiet of the church office, surrounded by stacks of books and baptismal records, Lissy told him everything. The auction, the bid, the woman, Garrett, the indenture paper he still had tucked in his trunk. Father Matthew listened patiently. When Lissy was finished, the priest sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Lissy, he said softly. You did not buy a servant. You bought a witness. You bought a stick of dynamite, and the fuse is lit. What do you mean? This labor auction, Father Matthew said, his voice laced with contempt. This is Hodge's new enterprise. It's not just about greed, though God knows the man is greedy. It's about pacification. It's about control. The priest stood and walked to a map of the territory pinned to his wall. Hodge is part of what they call the San Carlos Ring, a web of contractors, politicians, and agents. They are paid by the government to feed and house the Apache on the reservation. But the money, it vanishes. They supply rotten beef, half rations of flour. The people starve. I've heard the rumors, Lissy said. They are not rumors, Father Matthew said, his eyes flashing. But it gets worse. When the Apache get desperate, when a few young men jump the reservation to hunt, Hodge declares it an uprising. He calls in the cavalry from Fort Lowell or Fort Grant. They round up hostiles. But they don't just round up the warriors, Lissy. They take women. They take children. They're clearing the land. Lissy felt the blood drain from his face. And what happens to these prisoners? The priest continued. Hodge falsifies the reports. He lists the men as killed while resisting, and the women and children as relocated. But he relocates them, one by one, through these auctions. He sells them as indentured labor to men like Garrett, who work them to death in his mines or ranches. He's a slaver, Lissy, plain and simple, wrapped in a U.S. government contract. Lissy's mind reeled. The woman, Narlin. This woman you bought, Father Matthew said, tapping the map. Where did they say she was from? Near Fort Grant? Yes, Lissy said. That would be the Arevapa band. Hodge has been trying to clear them out for a year. They won't stay on the reservation. They prefer their canyon. Narlin isn't just a random captive, Lissy. She is likely a survivor of a massacre, and she is a living witness to Hodge's crimes. He didn't sell her because he wanted $100. He sold her to bury her, to make her disappear on a remote ranch. Lissy slumped into the chair. He thought he was selling her to Garrett, someone who would silence her. Exactly. But he sold her to you, Father Matthew said, leaning forward. A man with a conscience, a man who fought in the war. Hodge has made a terrible mistake. He has underestimated you. He hasn't, Lissy said bitterly. He knows I'm just a broken-down rancher with no money and no friends. He'll just send Kent. He'll arrest me for horse theft or rustling and take her back. Then you cannot let that happen. The priest's voice was firm. You are holding the one person who can bring him down. That indenture paper. It is your only defense. It is a legal, binding contract, signed by his own clerk and witnessed by the sheriff. He cannot legally just take her back. But he'll use force, Lissy insisted. Yes, which is why you cannot just hide. You have to expose him. Father Matthew looked at Lissy. This woman, Narlin, does she talk? Not much, Lissy said. But she's strong. She's not broken, not at all. Then you must talk to her. Find out what she saw. Find out who she is. Her testimony, combined with the whispers I've heard from my contacts at the agency, it might be enough. There is a U.S. Marshal in Tucson, a man named Bennett. He is said to be an honest man. If you could get proof, real proof, to Marshal Bennett, you might survive this. Lissy left the church as the sun reached its zenith, the heat a physical blow. The ride home was faster, spurred by a new, sharper terror. He wasn't just protecting a woman anymore. He was harboring the one witness who could burn the whole corrupt system to the ground. When he topped the ridge overlooking his ranch, his heart stopped. There was smoke. He spurred Patches into a frantic gallop, his mind screaming. He was too late. Garrett had come. He burst into his valley, but the house was fine. The smoke wasn't from a fire, it was from his chimney. He slid from the horse, his rifle in his hand. He crept to the door and eased it open. Nalin was at the fireplace. She had a fire going. A rabbit was roasting on a spit. On the table, she had laid out his rifle, his shotgun, and his pistol, all of which she had meticulously cleaned, oiled, and loaded. She looked up as he entered, her expression unbothered. "You were slow," she said. "I was hungry." Lissy stared at the arsenal on his table, then at the roasting rabbit, then at her. She had taken charge. She had prepared for a siege. "I saw the priest," Lissy said, his voice unsteady. "I know what Hodge is doing. I know what they did to your people." Nalin stopped turning the spit. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. She looked at him, her eyes seeming to pierce right through him, searching his soul. "Good," she said, her voice flat. "Then you know. We cannot run. We must kill him." Lissy was taken aback. "Kill him? Nalin, we can't just. We're talking about a US agent. We'd be hunted down and hanged by the end of the week." "He is not a man," Nalin said, her voice a low, vibrating hum of controlled rage. She turned the spit. "He is a disease. You do not reason with a disease. You burn it out." "There's another way," Lissy argued, walking to the table. "Father Matthew says there's a marshal in Tucson, a man named Bennett. If we can get him proof—" "Proof," Nalin scoffed. She turned from the fire to face him fully. Her small frame seemed to radiate a heat more intense than the flames. "My entire village is proof. They are ash and bone in Arivipa Canyon. What more proof does a man in Tucson need?" "A ledger," Lissy said, the idea solidifying in his mind. "Hodge is a businessman, a corrupt one. He'll have records. Father Matthew said he's part of a ring. Men like that keep books. They have to track their money, their sales." Nalin considered this. Her pragmatism warred with her rage. "His office, at the agency. Exactly. If we could get that book, you would ride to Tucson and leave me here. Garrett would have me in a day." "No," Lissy said. "We'd have to go together. But we can't just ride out. They're watching. We'd need a distraction. We'd need a plan. And first I need you to trust me." Nalin laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. "Trust? You bought me?" "I know," Lissy said, the words heavy with shame. "And I'm sorry for that. But I'm not him. I'm not Hodge. I'm not Garrett. I'm just a man who's tired of watching." "Tired of watching?" she said, her eyes narrowing. "What do you know of watching?" Lissy leaned against the wall, the weight of his own past pressing down on him. The room was hot. He felt the old, familiar tightness in his chest. I was in the war. A guard. At a place called Andersonville. A prison camp. He hadn't said the name aloud in 10 years. "I wasn't a prisoner. I was a guard. On the outside," he said, his voice hollow. "I had food. I had a uniform. And every day I watched them. Thousands of them. Starving. Dying of sickness. Of despair. They were my own men. Union boys. And I just watched." He looked at his hands. There was one. A boy. From Ohio. Couldn't have been 17. He'd come to the fence line every day. We weren't allowed to talk to them. Weren't allowed to give them anything. He'd just stand there. He got thinner. Sicker. One morning, he was there, holding the fence, and he just died. Standing up. And I was 10 feet away, with a canteen of fresh water. He finally looked at her. "My soul, Nalin. It's not free. It's been locked in that camp for a decade. When I saw you on that block, I saw that boy. I saw me, doing nothing. I bought you. I bought you to try and save him. To save me." It was selfish. It was wrong. But it's the truth. The room was silent. Nalin stared at him, her expression unreadable. She had expected a monster, or a fool. She had not expected this. She had not expected a man as haunted as she was. She walked to him. He tensed. She stopped, just out of arm's reach. "You have a scar on your soul," she said, quietly. "A ghost?" "Yes." She then turned her back to him, a gesture of profound, terrifying trust. She pulled the collar of her rough-spun shirt to the side, exposing her right shoulder blade. Lissy drew a sharp breath. It was a brand, a circle with a G in the middle. Frank Garrett's brand. "No," Lissy whispered, a new, hot fury rising in him. "When? Not Garrett," she said, her voice dead. "Hodge, he did this, before the auction." She pulled her shirt back up. She turned to face him, and her eyes were no longer fiery. They were dead, cold, empty. "He rounded up my people, my husband, my son. He was 4 years old." Her voice didn't waver, but a single tear traced a clean line through the grime on her cheek. "Hodge's men, the agency police, they shot them. They shot my son as he ran to me. And Hodge watched. He smoked his cigar." She wiped the tear away with a vicious motion. "He rounded up the women. He told us we were damaged goods, that we needed to be marked." He held the brand himself. He said, "This is the mark of my new, civilized world." He laughed. Lissy felt his own scars, his own ghosts, shrivel and burn away in the face of her agony. His suffering was a pale shadow. His guilt was a luxury. Her pain was a living, breathing thing, a canyon carved out of her. "He sold me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "But he made a mistake. I was not broken. I was waiting. I did not eat your food because I was weak. I was preparing. I was waiting for him. I would have found a way. I would have killed him. With a rock. With my hands. I would have died, but he would have died." She looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes were not those of a victim or a prisoner. They were the eyes of a warrior. "And then you came, the man with the sad eyes, the ghost. You interrupted my plan." A strange, wild hope sparked in her gaze. "But now, you are here, and you have a rifle, and you hate him, too." Lissy looked at the woman before him. She wasn't an Apache. She wasn't an indenture. She was Nalin, and her soul wasn't the one that needed freeing. His was. And she had just shown him the way. It wasn't through hiding or running or wallowing in the past. It was through justice. "No," Lissy said, his voice finding a new, hard strength. "We won't just kill him. That's too fast. We will destroy him. We will take his power. We will show the world what he is. And then we will see him pay." Nalin stared at him. Then, slowly she nodded. "The ledger. We get the ledger." "We get the ledger," Lissy agreed. "But we'll need a way in. His office is next to the sheriff's. It's the most guarded building in town." "Then we will need a fire," Nalin said. "A big one." The plan was forged in the fire of Nalin's grief and Lissy's awakened conscience. It was desperate, reckless, and their only chance. "Hodge's office," Lissy said, pacing the small cabin, "is built of adobe, but the floor, the desk, the files, they're all pine. The sheriff's office is attached. Brody Kent is lazy, but he's not stupid. He and his deputy sit in there all day." "They are not there at night," Nalin offered. "No, but Hodge locks everything. The door is thick. The windows are barred." "Then we cannot go at night," Nalin said, thinking. "We must go when the doors are open, when the town is busy." Lissy stopped. "Founder's Day. It's in 3 days. The whole town celebrates. Drinking, games, a speech from Agent Hodge, probably. He will make a speech, Nalin said, a grim certainty in her voice. He will talk about progress and civilization. Men like him, they love their own voice. While he's making his speech, Lissy continued, the plan forming, the town will be in the square. The sheriff's office will be empty. Or at least, distracted. But the agency office will be locked, Nalin countered. Maybe not. Hodge will be in and out. He'll want his papers, his speech. He'll have his clerk, Mr. Peters, running errands. The door will be in use. It is not enough, Nalin said. We need a diversion. A real one. Something to pull every man away. Something loud. They both looked at each other. The same thought occurred to them simultaneously. Frank Garrett, Lissy said. He will be there, Nalin said. He will be drinking. He will be looking for you. I know. Lissy nodded. So I'll give him what he wants. I'll start a fight. Not just any fight. A saloon-clearing brawl. Something that pulls Sheriff Kent and his deputy off the street. You will fight Garrett? And his men? Nalin looked at him, assessing his lean, wiry frame. He was strong, but he wasn't a brawler like Garrett. I'll have to. It'll have to be big enough to give you time. While I'm distracting them, Lissy said, a grimace on his face. You slip in. Not through the front door. Through the back. Is there a back door? No, Lissy said. But there's a window. In the storage room. It's barred, but the adobe around it, it's old. Crumbles. I am small, Nalin said. But the bars. I'll ride in tonight. I'll loosen them. Just enough. I'll take a chisel and hammer. I'll make it look like rot. It's a risk, but it is the only way. Nalin nodded. I get in. I find the book. What does it look like? I don't know, Lissy admitted. A ledger. Black, probably. Big. Look for names. Your name. Garrett's name. Look for numbers. Dollar amounts. I will find it. And then you get out. The same way. You meet me at the mission. Father Matthews. He will hide you. He will help. I'll join you when I can. If you are not in a cell, Nalin said. If I'm in a cell, you take the book. You take patches. You ride to Tucson. You find Marshal Bennett. You don't stop for anything. You understand? You do not come back for me. She held his gaze. I understand. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Lissy rode to town under the cover of a new moon. He crept behind the agency building, the smell of dust and stale beer thick in the air. He found the window. It was, as he'd remembered, small and barred. He worked for an hour, his heart in his throat, chipping away at the hard-packed adobe around the iron bars. He loosened them, not enough to be obvious, but enough that a strong, desperate pull could tear them free. Back at the ranch, they prepared for a different kind of war. Nalin wasn't satisfied with Lissy's plan. You fight Garrett, she said. You lose. He is a bear. You are a wolf. You are smart, but he is brute force. You cannot win that way. I don't have to win, Lissy said. I just have to last. No, you must hurt him. You must make it real. She took him out to the yard. She taught him how to fight. Not the clumsy brawling of a saloon, but the Apache way. Never stand still, she commanded, circling him. Use his weight. He is big. He is slow. You are fast. Go for the eyes. The throat. She pointed. The place that makes him a man. There are no rules. Only survival. They sparred. She was a blur. She hit him 3 times before he even raised his hands. She was ruthless, efficient, and she showed him how to be the same. He learned to use his elbows, his knees, his boots. Good, she said, as he finally managed to block one of her strikes and shove her back. Now, the rifle. They practiced shooting. He was a good shot, a hunter's shot. She was a warrior. She showed him how to load and fire on the move, how to drop to the ground, roll, and come up shooting. Hodge will have a gun, she said, her eyes cold. If he finds me, I will not be taken again. I need a weapon. Lissy looked at his small arsenal. The rifle was too big, the shotgun too loud. He handed her his pistol, a Colt Peacemaker. This was my wife's. She never used it. Nalin took it. The heavy, blued steel revolver looked almost too big for her small hand, but she held it with a steady, practiced grip. She checked the load. I will not waste a shot, she said. The night before Founder's Day, neither of them slept. They sat on the porch, cleaning the weapons, the oil and solvent smell mixing with the night-blooming jasmine. Lissy, Nalin said, her voice soft in the darkness. The ghost, the boy at the fence. Does he still talk to you? Lissy stopped wiping down the Winchester's barrel. Every night, for 10 years. After tomorrow, Nalin said, sliding the pistol into the waistband of her trousers, hiding it under her shirt. Maybe he will be quiet. And you, Nalin? Lissy asked. Your family. Will you? They are not ghosts, she said, her voice hard as stone. They are a debt, and tomorrow Bartholomew Hodge will begin to pay. Founder's Day dawned hot and clear. The town of San Gabriel was vibrating with false cheer. Bunting hung from the saloons, and a rickety podium had been erected in the main square. From their vantage point on the ridge, Lissy and Nalin watched the town fill up. Ranchers, miners, and townsfolk, all in their Sunday best, gathered for the free barbecue and cheap beer. There, Nalin said, pointing. Frank Garrett and 4 of his men had just tied their horses outside the Lucky Ace saloon. And there's Hodge, Lissy muttered. The agent emerged from his office, dressed in a pristine white suit, looking like a bloated angel of death. He was followed by his weaselly clerk, Peters, and flanked by Sheriff Brody Kent. It's time, Lissy said. They split up. Nalin, hiding her pistol under her shirt, slipped into the alleys, moving like a shadow toward the back of the agency. Lissy mounted Patches and rode directly into the main street, his face a mask of grim determination. He tied Patches in front of the saloon. He took a deep breath, picturing Nalin's movements, eyes, throat, knees. He pushed through the batwing doors. The saloon was packed. Frank Garrett was at the bar, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, roaring with laughter. Lissy walked straight up to him. Garrett. Garrett turned, his smile fading. Creed, you got a lot of nerve showing your face. I heard you're employing my property. She's not your property, Lissy said, his voice loud enough for the bar to hear. And she's not mine. Oh, Garrett sneered, enjoying the audience. What is she then, your little Apache whore? Lissy didn't hesitate. He didn't throw a punch. He did exactly as Nalin had taught him. He lunged, not at Garrett's face, but at his knee. He kicked sideways, hard with the heel of his boot. Garrett bellowed, a sound of pure shock and pain as his knee buckled. The bar went silent. As Garrett stumbled, Lissy grabbed the whiskey bottle from his hand and smashed it over the head of the man standing next to him. "He's crazy!" someone yelled. The saloon erupted. Garrett, roaring with rage, lunged for Lissy. Lissy sidestepped, letting the big man crash into the bar. Lissy grabbed a chair and slammed it across Garrett's back. The fight was on. It was exactly what he wanted. Chaos. Outside, Nalin heard the first crash of glass and the roar of the crowd. The diversion. She ran to the back of the agency. The alley was empty. She found the loose bars. She jammed her fingers into the crumbling adobe, planted her feet, and pulled. The mortar gave way. The entire window grate came loose in her hands. She set it down silently, slipped through the narrow opening, and dropped into the dark storage room. She was in. She eased the door open. The clerk, Peters, was gone, no doubt drawn outside by the noise. The main office was empty, and on the desk, a large leather-bound book, a ledger. Her heart hammered. She ran to the desk. She opened it. Names, dates, numbers. Frank Garrett, $40. One male Pute. G-Bar Ranch, $50. One female Apache, Anna. Her own sale, her own name. She heard a noise. The front door of the agency opened. It was Hodge. He hadn't gone to the speech. He'd come back. "Peters," he called out, annoyance in his voice. "Where did you—" He saw her. His eyes widened, first in shock, then in a cold, venomous recognition. "You," he breathed. "The broken little bird." Narlin didn't run. She stood, her hand on the ledger. "My name is Narlin," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You murdered my son." She pulled the pistol from her waistband. Hodge didn't flinch. He smiled. A savage with a gun. How novel. "You think you can—" He lunged, surprisingly fast for a man his size. He grabbed a heavy inkwell from the desk and threw it. Narlin fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. The bullet went wide, shattering a whiskey bottle on the wall behind him. Hodge tackled her, slamming her against the wall. The gun clattered to the floor. "You stupid creature," he hissed, his hands grabbing her throat. "I'll kill you myself. I'll—" Narlin brought her knee up, hard, just as Lissy had taught her to teach him. Hodge screamed, a high-pitched, agonizing sound, and his grip loosened. Narlin broke free, gasping, clawing for the ledger. The fight in the saloon had spilled into the street. Lissy was bleeding from his nose and a cut over his eye, but Garrett was in worse shape. His knee was useless, and his face was a mask of blood. Sheriff Kent and his deputy finally arrived, guns drawn. "That's enough, Creed," Kent yelled. "You're under arrest, both of you." Just as Kent grabbed Lissy's arm, the gunshot echoed from the agency. Nayland, Lissy's training, his fear, his rage, all coalesced. He slammed his elbow back into Kent's ribs, breaking the sheriff's grip. "Nayland!" he roared, and he ran. He burst through the front door of the agency, just as Hodge was recovering, his face purple with rage, pulling a small derringer from his coat pocket. Narlin was on the floor, scrambling for the ledger. "No!" Lissy yelled, and he launched himself at Hodge. The two men crashed over the desk. The derringer went off, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. Lissy, fueled by a decade of repressed fury, grabbed Hodge by his starched collar and slammed his head, once, twice, against the hardwood floor. Hodge went limp. The street was silent. The brawl had stopped. The whole town, Garrett, Kent, Father Matthew, who had just arrived, was staring into the office. They saw Lissy Creed, bleeding and breathing like a bellows, standing over the unconscious form of Agent Hodge. They saw the Apache woman, Narlin, bruised and defiant, clutching a large black ledger to her chest. He tried to kill me," Sheriff Kent stammered, his gun wavering. "Creed, you're... He tried to kill her," Lissy spat, pointing at Hodge. "Just like he's been killing all of them." "Lies!" Kent shouted. "She's a hostile. Then read the book, Sheriff." Narlin's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. She held the ledger out. "Read his proof." Sheriff Kent's eyes widened in terror. He knew what was in that book. "What's it say, Brody?" Frank Garrett limped forward, his face a ruin. "What's in the damn book?" Narlin opened it. She didn't hand it to Kent. She handed it to Father Matthew, who had quietly moved to the front of the crowd. The priest put on his spectacles. He read the first entry aloud. August 4th, to Frank Garrett, G-Bar Ranch, 2 Apache children. Payment received, $60. The crowd gasped. Garrett's face went white. September 1st, Father Matthew continued, his voice ringing with divine fury. To Sheriff Brody Kent, payment for looking the other way on the San Carlos beef contract, $100. Sheriff Kent tried to run. 2 miners, their faces hard with disgust, grabbed him. It's all here, Father Matthew declared to the stunned crowd. Years of it, theft, slavery, murder, all in Agent Hodges' own hand. Lissy looked at Nalin. She was watching the crowd turn on Kent, watching them bind the groaning, semi-conscious Hodge. Her face was grim, but the cold emptiness in her eyes was gone. It was replaced by a terrible, burning, righteous light. She had her justice. The aftermath was swift. U.S. Marshal Bennett arrived from Tucson, summoned by Father Matthew. He was a quiet man who read the ledger, interviewed Nalin, and looked at the brand on her shoulder. His face never changed, but his eyes were like chips of steel. He took Bartholomew Hodge, Sheriff Brody Kent, and Frank Garrett into federal custody, shackled and bound for trial. The San Carlos agency was shut down, and the San Carlos ring was broken. Back at the Crosswind Ranch, the indenture paper was ash, burned by Bennett himself. Nalin was, by every law, free. They spent the next weeks healing. He mended her cuts. She stitched the gash over his eye. They rebuilt the fences and tamed the wild roan, Red, who now followed Nalin like a shadow. The silence returned, but it was no longer a silence of fear or awkwardness. It was comfort. One evening they sat on the porch. "What will you do now?" Lissy asked quietly. Nalin stared at the mountains for a long time, toward the canyon full of her ghosts. "My people are scattered," she said. "My family is not there." She looked at the small ranch house. "This is the first place I have felt safe." Lissy looked at his own calloused hands, no longer seeing the ghosts of Andersonville. "The place was empty," he said, his voice thick. "I was empty. It doesn't feel empty anymore." He cleared his throat. "You are free, Nalin. You can go anywhere. But if you chose to stay, the Crosswind is half yours by rights. You saved it. You saved me." Nalin was quiet, and Lissy's heart hammered. Then she turned to him, her eyes soft but practical. "The east pasture," she said. "The fence is weak. A storm is coming tonight." Lissy looked at her, confused. "The fence? We must fix it," she said, "before the cattle get out." She stood and looked down at him. "Are you coming, Lissy? The work is not done." It wasn't a promise of love. It was a choice, a partnership. She was staying. A slow smile spread across Lissy's face. The tightness in his chest, the one that had lived there for 10 years, suddenly released. The ghosts were quiet. "Aye," he said, grabbing his hat. "Before the storm." He walked off the porch and stood beside her. Together they walked toward the barn, 2 free souls under a vast, open sky. That's the end of Lissy and Nalin's story, but it's the beginning of their new life. They found that true freedom isn't about running from your ghosts. It's about finding the courage to face them, and the partner who will stand beside you while you do. The Wild West was a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a place where 2 broken souls, an Apache warrior and a haunted veteran, could forge a new world for themselves, built not on contracts and chains, but on shared strength and hard-won respect. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We hope their journey moved you. If it did, we'd be so grateful if you could take a second to hit that like button. It tells us we're on the right track, And if you want to hear more real-life dramas and stories of justice, please subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. Don't forget to share this video with anyone you think might need a reminder that even in the darkest times, courage can light the way. We'll see you in the next story.